Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, Democrats secure a 51st seat in the Senate with the win in Georgia by the incumbent Raphael Warnock. But then Arizona's Kristen Sinema has just changed her party affiliation from Democrat to Independent. And it's the end of an era, with the last Boeing 747 coming out of the factory this week after 53 years in production. And the CEO of Walmart says shoplifting and organized theft has increased so much that if something is not done, they'll be closing stores in certain areas and raising prices. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday. That means it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. We've got a great show for you tonight. Coming up this evening, we're going to be talking about the economy, the Treasury going off the gold standard, inflation, and more with former 18-term member of House of Representatives and former candidate for the President of the United States, Dr. Ron Paul. He spent 36 years in the House, was a candidate for president twice, and he's never been shy about discussing the national debt, the economy, and interest rates. And we'll be discussing more. Dr. Ron Paul coming up. But how did the stock market do this week? Well, as of the close today, stocks closed lower with a hotter than expected producer price index report and the thought that next week's consumer price index will also not look as good. Also, the indexes were all down for today. The Dow Jones ended the week at 33,475, which was down almost 2.8% for the week. The S&P 500, they closed today at 3934, and that was down 3.4% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended the day at 11,000, and then that was down 4% for the week. Well, this week, Walmart's top executive, CEO Doug McMillon, said Walmart will likely be raising prices and closing stores if authorities do not start prosecuting thieves. McMillon said on CNBC this week that theft is higher than ever. The National Retail Federation said now that many major cities have put their theft under $800 as a misdemeanor, and some have even put it under $900. Retail stores have lost more than $94 billion due to shoplifting between 2020 and 2021. And the last year alone, organized shoplifting crimes are up 26.5% in just last year in 2021. According to the National Retail Federation, for every $1 billion in sales, an additional $700,000 is also taken away through stealing. Over the last 2 years, shoplifting has increased more than 50%. And this past month, an Apple store in California had a band of thieves just walk in and just stole all the iPhones and computers on the display counters, stealing over $36,000 in merchandise, then walking right out of the store and into a crowded mall. In addition to Walmart stating that they may be closing stores in high-crime areas, many others, such as Walgreens, CVS's, and Rite Aid's, have also closed stores due to theft. Starbucks has also started closing stores, including their flagship store in New Orleans on Canal Street. And the government today released the Producer Price Index, which measures what manufacturers have to pay for raw goods to be made for retail. For November, the PPI rose year over year, rose almost 7.5%. And for the month, November, it rose 0.3%. The core PPI, which does not include food and energy, was at 6.2% for the year and up 0.4% for November. Next week, the Consumer Price Index, which measures either the rise or dropping of inflation, will be released. Also next week, the Federal Reserve meets on Tuesday and Wednesday for the next raising of interest rates that I'm sure are going to be inevitable. Well, let's get to our guest this evening. He spent 36 years in Congress. He ran for President of the United States twice, and he's here with us tonight. Dr. Ron Paul is with us. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up, Dr. Paul.
Andre, it's great to be with you.
The Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates continuously, 75 basis points for numerous times of meetings. And now going into 2023, I mean, we're in December, but going into 2023, what do you think the Fed should do?
Well, they should just go out of business. They should just leave it alone.
And to be perfectly
Because,
blunt,
fixing the interest rates is the real problem we have with the whole economy, because it's price fixing of the most important price in an economy. Because if you're getting a lot of information, at least in a free market, the information comes from the interest rates. It tells savers what to do, what spenders have to do, the investors have to do. All these things are decided by a lot of people deciding what interest rates should be. So it's all a gimmick. But the question is usually, yes, but what do you think they should do and how long are they going to do it? Well, they're going to monkey around for a long time, and they're not going to solve their problems because they have no idea what the interest rate should be. I happen to have an idea, and from my own viewpoint, is that if we had market rates of interest, my guess is that interest rates would have to be a lot higher. A little better conversation ought to be, what will the Congress do on spending?
right now with interest rates the way they are, what they call the terminal rate, which is the rate that they'll finally end at, nobody knows what it is. And like you said, I don't think they know of what's going on. But you were in Congress at the time when Paul Volcker was the Federal Reserve. In fact, I know I've watched you many times. You've even had private meetings with, at the time, Chairman Volcker. I mean, he had to raise rates in 1980, 81 and such. I mean, he had to raise rates so high that just strangled the economy to lower those interest rates. Do you think that, you say politically, and I agree with you, I know the legislature, Congress is so runs by politics every 2 years. Do you think they're going to have to keep going higher until they finally start reducing that inflation?
Yes, they're going to go higher, but you don't know if the Federal Reserve and the Congress will buy into it and let it happen. I don't think they will. It's going to happen, but it'll come more because the market is demanding it, because the markets are demanding that there is a correction. They inflate, they get the bubbles going and the inflation going, and the market says, no, you have to. The market would like to see interest rates high enough to slow up the economy and correct the problem. But yeah, they went up to 21% under Volcker, and in a way, it gave us a reprieve, and it was a tremendous time. The 70s, that's what motivated me to go into politics, was really the ability to understand monetary policy before 1971, because I became fascinated with that on the Bretton Woods artificially gold standard. But in 71, the world went off gold completely and totally. And I said, it's ushering in a bad age, and that age of inflation and the calamity that we're facing now, and all the spending that's happening. It's never happened before to have a single fiat currency that becomes the boss. But it will come to an end because the markets don't like that, and the political system doesn't like it. So eventually that's going to end, and that's why there's so much fussing and fuming going on. I think that is reflected in our political arguments, because they won't talk about what's really going on. It's the bankruptcy of the country. It's the destruction of the currency. That's what's wrong, and we have a moral bankruptcy as well. But when a country goes broke, it doesn't want to liquidate it. So they will never pay off the debt. But the debt will be liquidated, and that's what's happening right now. We're liquidating the debt because the real debt is going down at the rate of 10% a year or more, because they don't tell you what the inflation rate is, the price inflation rate. So that's what they're doing. They have to liquidate the debt, and it's going to be prolonged because they don't allow the market to operate.
Well, Dr. Paul, right now, I mean, as we speak, our national debt is over 31 trillion, and by the time this interview ends, it's going to be maybe even closer to 32 trillion. But the days, we used to both think about our children and our grandchildren, and we'll be paying off the debt. But have we all resigned the fact that they'll never pay off this debt? All we can hope for is probably the economy to grow bigger, to be able to keep up with this increment debt?
But the debt's going down because if you can print enough money and push prices way up, the real debt shrinks. So if you have a $31 trillion debt and you double the supply of money, this is just for instance, The real debt is only 15 trillion because we've diluted the debt. But it's wicked because it causes so much trouble. People benefit and people suffer. And then they print more money and the rich get the money first, so they benefit from this. So the debt will be liquidated, and then you can start talking about rebuilding again. Right now, we have borrowed so much money, like you mentioned, the $31 trillion. We borrowed that money, and now we're raising interest rates, so we have to pay pay the interest on all that money we borrowed. But it's not in the process of correcting things, because what we're doing, we have to borrow the money to pay the interest on the money we borrowed. That's why there's going to be a lot more political chaos, because the people, they will not. It's like a drug addiction. The person on drugs, they don't very often volunteer to come in and say, oh yeah, I want to quit, tell me what I have to do. But when you quit printing the money, it's very painful. But the market will make the systems quit working, because the debt has to be liquidated. We can't afford it anymore, and that's why they keep taxing the people. People have to realize that when prices go up, that's a tax. I don't like to talk about inflation, the CPI going up 10%. I don't like that because it's misleading, and it's done on purpose so that you don't think about the problem. The Federal Reserve. It's going up because the Federal Reserve printed so much money. Well, why did they print money? Because we have an empire to take care of. We have to build these weapons, and we have a welfare state, and we run the world. And who wants to give that up? But the market's going to work, and it'll be liquidated, and we have to decide as a country on whether or not we want to go toward a freer market than we have today.
Well, Dr. Paul, I think it was Milton Friedman, the economist, who one time said inflation is a tax that Congress doesn't have to vote on. And you spent 36 years in Congress. I mean, you probably know a lot of the players that are right now in Congress by first name basis. I mean, the ability to tax and to spend money is such a great power that they'll just go ahead and kick that can down the road. I mean, do you see any kind of adults in the room to say we have to start cleaning up our own mess and not let the next guy do it?
Yeah, there's, I think, 5 people in Washington.
You can count on one hand, but you don't have to need the second hand, right?
And there may be 5 that understand it, but they're not going to put themselves out there and say, I'm cutting spending. So you'd have to cut spending. And
they're not going to do it. You may cut spending at the Paul household or the Laborde household, but cutting spending at the in Congress is an anathema for Congress.
Yeah, but it has to be paid for, and that's what inflation is, and Friedman is absolutely right. It is a tax. So when I tell people, when they go in and all of a sudden they say, oh, eggs are twice as much as they were before. Well, that's a tax on there. It's not that the chickens quit laying eggs. When they come up short like they do for wartime conditions or COVID war, that kind of stuff, they just print money. And it's not. And the other thing that people do not want to admit, especially depending on which side it comes, but they don't want to admit that both parties are guilty. And the people, to a large degree, are guilty too, because but out of ignorance most of the time, because of the propaganda and what they've been taught, they don't realize how important it is to understand monetary policy, because they are the taxers. And there's a misunderstanding. So there's a lot of responsibility goes around, and I blame the universities especially, and that's why I praise Austrian economics, because they believe in sound money. And I've emphasized the point that the restraint, the founders knew all about it, because they had the runaway inflation of the continental dollar. So they say nothing other than gold and silver can be used as money. And yet we didn't follow that very long. But the big separation of that and the destruction of the currency was August 15th, 1971. That is when we threw in the towel and said, we're dishonest. We told you that the money was backed by something. It isn't. Just our promises. We'll print it when you need it.
Well, Dr. Paul,
until there's print.
I think that was a Sunday. That was a Sunday when Richard Nixon came on the air and said about the gold. I think there were more people that were upset that he interrupted Bonanza and about the Cartwrights on the Ponderosa. Now, I know you know who I'm talking about, but there are people that were born after that were going, who are the Cartwrights and what's the Ponderosa and what's a Bonanza? But they were more upset because Hoss Cartwright was interrupted than the fact that they were taken off the gold standard at that time in August of '71.
Yes, you have information there that most people don't have, so keep at it. Keep passing out that
Well, I'll tell you, I have a confession. I have a confession.
If they don't understand.
We always have like a little trivia, a financial trivia, and last August, on that date, we had the time that it was on, and it was on during Bonanza, and the calls that NBC got that were so furious that Richard Nixon interrupted Bonanza. I have to be honest, I wasn't watching Bonanza, or maybe I was watching Bonanza, I don't know. But the only reason I know it was because of the fact that we had that as a trivia question last August. They're talking right now about, Congress raises the debt ceiling and continuously raising. Well, now they're even discussing having an automatic raising of the debt ceiling so that they don't have to vote on it. How dangerous would this be?
Well, it just compounds everything we're concerned about today. The problems in the economy, the inflation, high interest rates, and all these things. It just gets much worse. That's all. But it does start with the spending. I don't think people they always raise it because they're very bipartisan. Everybody gets together. So they talk about elections and major changes and all this, but they all believe in the Federal Reserve. They all believe in deficit financing. They all believe that the welfare state is a good idea. They all believe that we have an empire to defend, and so they're not going to buck it. It's all political stunt. They do a lot of arguing and everything, but you can list about 5 things there that both parties endorsed. So how much talk did you hear in this past election about why does that Ron Paul, what's he thinks? He thinks they should audit the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Well, you have in the Paul household, I know like in my house, we have budgets we have to work on. And when you were in Congress, you came up with a budget. I mean, the word budget has been so far since removed from Congress because they're now just raising the debt ceiling because nobody wants to do a budget because you can't balance the budget because there's just so much more spending than there is income coming in. So if you're giving an automatic debt ceiling raise, that's like putting a bottle of alcohol on a table with a bunch of people that are addicted to the stuff and saying, have at it.
I think we lost this debate that we're having right now at the time they were writing the Constitution because Hamilton said you have to be able to borrow money. But Jefferson said, no, we shouldn't be able to borrow any money whatsoever. We should have gold and silver. But Jefferson lost that argument, so they were able to borrow money. And then they eventually just whittled away at the restraints that this monetary system was supposed to place on us. I mean, even during the Civil War period, they suspended the gold standard and went back to gold. And it's just been going on and on. So I think that I think they knew about it even at the time of the founding of the country, but the dramatic event was in 1971. So that has to be addressed. But nobody wants to do that because that means you have to curtail the expenditures. But it's not, you keep thinking about people getting food stamps and the poor people can't pay their rent. And there's a lot of sympathy and empathy for these people. But the whole thing is the real welfare beneficiaries is the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry. They're horrible. And they may just think how many bucks they made with passing out a vaccine. I personally considered not a good idea. Prices always go up faster than you can get your wages up, and that's why you have political crises, and that's the direction we're moving in.
We're talking, if you're just joining us, so happy to have Dr. Ron Paul. Been in Congress for 36 years, and after he was also former U.S. presidential candidate. Well, don't go away. We're going to take a break and be right back. Welcome back. We're glad to have Dr. Ron Paul with us. In 1971, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and, you know, even during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln took us off the gold standard, but he brought us back onto it. Do you think it's probably, I would say nothing is impossible, but it's highly improbable that we'd ever go back to a gold standard?
Not with a very big radical change in our whole system. You know, we'd have to give up the welfare warfare state. So that's not going to happen. People understood a lot more that you had to live within your means. So. And they had a 3-year transition period, and the people went through that, and they started withdrawing their greenbacks. They shrunk the money supply on purpose, and all of a sudden the price of gold had been up to show there had been the monetary inflation, and during that 3-year period, the price came back down to $20 an ounce, you know, back to the gold standard. So it stayed on there until we had the Federal Reserve come in and start playing mischief on it. And that, of course, led to the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was a real disaster.
I would assume, too, that they would have such strong pushback from Wall Street, because after it was taken, the dollars were taken off the gold standard, then you started having currency fluctuations where Wall Street traders would trade the U.S. dollar against, well, at the time, it was the franc, the Deutschmark, now it's the euro, or the Japanese yen, the peso, all these fluctuations that today, that there's a lot of money to be made on Wall Street with it because of the fluctuations.
Yes, they like that because before the Bretton Woods broke down, they didn't have these futures markets in currencies that changed every minute, and people making, you know, on daily trades on this. That's many $1 trillion worth of exchanges that go on. So. They would probably object because it would just be disruptive. They wouldn't probably think the big picture, but it would be disruptive to them having adapted to this. To them, it would be rather boring if your dollar maintained its its value and you didn't have to guess at what it is.
Dr. Paul, what is your feelings, your thoughts? Today, you have cryptocurrency, and there's a segment of this country that swear by it, Bitcoin and others. Just recently, FTX, a crypto exchange, just went under because of regulatory problems and using money that they didn't have. Do you think cryptocurrency should be in use? Do you think it should be regulated by the Treasury?
Historically, if you look at maybe 6,000 years of history, at least 5,000 years of history, gold and silver was picked by the people because it was a natural thing to do. And I don't happen to be attractive to, the fiat currencies, the cryptocurrencies. I don't understand it. I don't like how it works, and I like to see the stuff and hold it. So I personally don't have much desire, but I get along very well with people who like crypto because I want to defend liberty and I want freedom of choice, and I don't want the government involved. I think too many crypto people want the government involved and have regulation, but the market will regulate it and decide. And when you see days and weeks this past year, Bitcoin went from 68,000 down to 16,000. So it's something that somebody has to decide that. But I want it to be decided by the people, and I don't like the government regulating it. And then if it's going to be a good substitute for money, so be it. But no fraud. some of those exchanges sound a little bit like a banking system that the crypto people advertise. We don't want to deal with the banking system. But guess who does know and understand the exchanges? And that's the IRS.
Yeah. Well, that opens up a whole new can of worms, because I haven't even gotten to you about the 86,000 new agents that they're about to be hiring.
Oh.
Dr. Paul, unfortunately, my clock doesn't stop. Would you come back? Because I want to start back up now with the IRS and your thoughts on that, too. I hope you come back.
Yes, I sure will.
Thanks, Dr. Paul. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it pithy or concise and write us at Andre@WallStreetWrapUp.info. And now for a look ahead for market information for next week. But first, for whom was the Mercedes automobile named? Well, we've got the answer in just a moment. Well, for whom was the Mercedes automobile named? It was for Mercedes Daimler. She was the daughter of German automaker Gottlieb Daimler. Well, for an end of an era came this week when Boeing completed their last 747, which inspired the moniker Jumbo Jet. After 53 years, Boeing has discontinued the 747, with the last one assembled at the Boeing factory this Tuesday. When Boeing created the double-decker jet, it started a craze that all the airlines wanted in. Over the last several years, Boeing has been building 747s as now freighters and cargo aircraft. The last commercial for passengers was built in 2017. Well, the future of the wide-bodied airline is not going away. Boeing has on order 420 of their 787s, over 300 on order of their 777s, and 111 orders of their 767s. They were hoping to have the FAA certification for the 777X, which there are orders for over 300 to build, but they won't be coming out online until 2025 at this time. And finally, if you think you have a bad boss, be thankful you're not working at the Olive Garden in Kansas, where your boss would have been this lady. She was fired for sending a letter to all of her employees for taking too much time off. She wrote to all of her employees, "We are no longer tolerating any excuse for calling off. If you're sick, you need to come prove it to us. And if your dog died, you need to bring him in and prove it to us. If it's a family emergency and you can't say too bad, then go work somewhere else." So, well, for you managers out there, I would not follow this person, well, maybe in this type of a matter. And if you do feel this way, just don't put it in writing, all right? We've got some great guests coming up for the end of the year and bringing us into 2023. Coming up on the weeks ahead, we'll be talking with CNBC senior reporter Bob Pisani. As the senior reporter whose beat is the New York Stock Exchange, who still covers it for the Business Network, he's seen it all. We'll talk to Bob about the exchange. And join us next week when my guest was going to be Jim Spiro. Jim is the principal of the Spiro Group and managing director at Morgan Stanley. Jim has assets under management of over $2.8 billion. And we'll talk to him about how he sees the stock market for the end of the year and what's in store for 2023. That's next week, Morgan Stanley's Jim Spiro. As a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings. Best way, though, set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for this Friday, December 9th, 2022. Hope you enjoyed it. My thanks for Ron Paul for joining us this evening. But as always, it's you we appreciate for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, follow us always on social media, on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and WYES.org. Have a great weekend and a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.